Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Today we got a very special episode where we're going to be taking a look at a picture of Spider-Man and Mary Jane, or MJ. This is based off the recent Spider-Man Far From Home movie. Now before we get into much detail on this, I just want to take a small moment to do my shameless plug and remind you that this is a very humble channel. We have very few subscribers, and if you can add your name to that list of subscribers, I'd really appreciate it. So just go down below the video there, click on that big red subscribe button, help me out, and if you got a little extra time, feel free to leave a comment and click on that like button as well. Alright, now, without any further ado, let's take a look at the piece of work we got here. Now the title of this video made some mention of making lines look three-dimensional, and really what I'm intending to talk about here is the concept of using lines to cheat or simulate three-dimensional form. It is a discussion we'll be getting into a little bit later when we take a look at the Spider-Man aspect of this piece, but for right now I'd like to take a moment and focus our attention on the Zendaya caricature. So, Zendaya is the new face of Mary Jane Watson in the Spider-Man movies that are part of that Marvel/Sony universe. She's a little bit of a departure from the traditional Mary Jane that we see in the comic books, mostly because she's not a redhead. That's something that's always been something of a staple of the Mary Jane kind of character, so to speak. However, I will say that I have thoroughly enjoyed the recent Spider-Man movies, Zendaya included. I have no problem with her being Mary Jane. As a matter of fact, I think she's a great an interesting take on the character, and I look forward to kind of seeing what they do with her in the future. Now, the caricature of her face was actually pretty simple to put together. She has a very beautiful face. It's very symmetrical, but it's also very easy to see where the caricature lies, at least in terms of my opinion. So, you know, we're pretty far in the caricature already, but I'll let you know right off the bat here that the two main areas that were very easy to take a look at were her jawline area, including her lips and mouth, and also her eyes. Now, if you take a look at her eyes, she tends to have very squinty eyes, and they're very flat. There's almost a straight line along the lineup of the lower lids of those eyes. I had made her eyes a little bit wider because I wanted to show some kind of shocked expression on her face, but that straight line that kind of underlines the both the lower lids there was really kind of indicative to something that I saw in her face in just about every reference photograph I looked at. And again, the jawline and the mouth were also very distinct, unique. So basically matching them up against pictures and trying to draw them as accurately as possible was really where we get the resemblance from. The whole thing is really kind of tied together again by that lower jawline with a tiny little chin. This is something I see quite a bit on a lot of younger females. So again, it was pretty easy to kind of identify from the get-go, get it out there, and the rest was really just kind of putting together just an old Spider-Man picture, which, you know, can be really simple when you're talking about the idea that he's just really a matter of putting together some basic shapes like circles and ovals and things of that nature. Now, real brief word on the background here. This is going to go by pretty quick, but it's really just something I slapped in using the drawing guide that helped out with the perspective on it. So I put in a perspective line kind of high up in the middle of the sky, kind of where I wanted the sun to be. And then use those perspective lines to draw in the extreme angles of the buildings and the windows, and really just kind of put in a series of rectangles to represent windows and a little bit of an airbrushing a little bit later on just to try to get some reflection off those surfaces that I deemed to be glass. So back to our line drawing here. Now that we're done with the background, I'm finalizing what I want these kind of caricature looks to be. And one of the things I did struggle with just a little bit is her hair. If you notice, there's a lot going on there. And not only is it necessary to get all those curls in there, but also to try to give some sort of an idea that it's floating in air. The idea is she is swinging through the air along with Spider-Man, so her hair has to kind of flow in the breeze a little bit there. That also kind of explains her pose. She's kind of having her legs wrapped around Spider-Man. And if you've ever seen the Far From Home movie, I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler alert here. At the end of the film, she does go on something of a swinging little ride with Spider-Man. And as opposed to the way it's portrayed in the comic books typically, Zendaya is absolutely terrified swinging with Spider-Man, never wants to do it again. And again, this is something I was trying to kind of capture in the look on her face as well. So now we're moving into the inking phase here, and again, this is going to go pretty quick because I really wanted to take a moment and focus on Spider-Man and again how we're going to use simple lines to create three-dimensional form. So we're going to start here by putting in his head, and in a little bit we're going to also add in some webbing, and it's the webbing that we're going to take some time to talk about. So I'm going to stop the video right here for just a second. I'm going to go into Procreate and talk a little bit about this line work and what it means to trying to capture those basic forms using simple lines. Okay, now I've jumped over into Procreate here really briefly. What you're seeing on the screen is two identical pairs of pants. Now, these are obviously simple drawings, but we're going to use this to demonstrate a really simple optical illusion, something you may have even seen when you were, a little bit younger in school or something like that. And what we're going to do is use lines to create the optical illusion of 3 dimensions. And here's how this works. I'm going to take one leg of pants and I'm going to draw a series of curved lines. Let me just kind of shrink down the line work there a little bit. So again, I'm just going to draw some curved lines here, just like this. Nothing very fancy, nothing that requires a lot of skill. But what I'm going to do is take the other leg and I'm going to draw those curves going in an opposite direction, just like this. And what we get is something of an illusion, an optical illusion that tells you that one leg is kind of coming towards you in frame and one leg is going behind you. Now, I've done this pretty simple. I've done this in a hurry. The lines aren't very consistent. So let me just get rid of this and I'll show you what it looks like when you do this with a little bit more care. Take a look at that other set of pair of pants there, and you can see here, again, one leg is distinctly giving the appearance that it's moving away from you, and one is distinctly giving the appearance that it's moving towards you. And this is what form is all about. Form is taking a shape, like a square or a circle or something like that, and doing some rendering on it to make it appear as if it's 3-dimensional and on a 2-dimensional surface, like a piece of paper, or in this case, a tablet. And the beauty of line is that we can use line to cheat, to create that optical illusion that says there's 3 dimensions there when there really isn't. It does a great job fooling the eye with something as simple as this. Now, traditionally, when we work in digital art, we render form using a lot of other tools like color and light and shadow and things of that nature. But remember, comic books have been doing this and comic strips have been doing this for ages without the benefit of color in some instances. So figuring out ways to use line and even varying line thicknesses to cheat this concept of form really helps kind of sell this idea that there is something 3-dimensional on the page and give it some depth. Now, we can do this in opposite as well. So if I go back here to my original pair of pants, right, and I draw these lines in the opposite direction than the one I'm seeing on the right, you can see that the effect still works even if I switch pant legs here, okay? And we're going to use this to kind of define how we're going to get that Spider-Man costume together. Because whether you realize it or not, all of those little intricate designs of the webbing that appear on his costume are helping to create that optical illusion of form on the page. So let's go back to our time lapse. We'll talk a little bit more about what I'm referring to. Now, back in the time lapse, this is going to go a little bit quick, but what you may notice is there's a series of concentric red circles surrounding Spider-Man's face, or his mask. I'm using these as some of a guideline to draw in the webbing, but notice the curves of the lines. The reason those curves go in that very specific direction is in an attempt to make sure that you can get that illusion of form that we kind of demonstrated when we were looking at the pairs of pants a couple of seconds ago. So those curves of the webs actually help give you this illusion that the head has 3-dimensionality, that it is a solid object on the page. And it actually works so well that without the light and the shadow that you see on Zendaya's face a little bit later on, her face will look very flat compared to his, despite the fact that we haven't actually put in any shadow or light on the Spider-Man face yet. So again, the lines create that form. And you can see similar examples on the webbing that's contained on his chest, his gloves, and also his boot. Now, we moved into the coloring phase of this piece, and just a note on it to mention that there's a lot of overlapping going on between, somebody, wrapping their legs around a torso and then a hand trying to kind of offer a little bit of more support there. A lot of overlapping going on, as I said before. So that's why you see everything separated in these very, very distinct, colorful layers, so I can keep everything straight and have an idea of like what is going to overlap over another piece and, kind of help inform some of my choices when I get into the true lighting and true coloring and shadows a little bit later on. Now, this might be a good time to bring up lighting. If you remember a little bit earlier, I showed you what the background looked like, and it's mostly done. I'll do a little bit of tweaking on it at the end, but it's just essentially 2 skyscrapers sitting behind them with the sky behind it. But the sky does serve as our light source on this. But it is kind of peeking out from behind the buildings and lighting up the rear form of the figures that we see in front of us in the foreground. So that's why I made some of the lighting choices I made here, where you see the light coming around both edges or both sides of the arm, and along the side of Zendaya's back, and you'll see it around the top of the head of Spider-Man a little bit later on as well. Again, the light source is coming from behind, so it's almost creating something of a, maybe like a glow effect to a certain degree behind those figures. That's not to say that's the only light source that exists. We can assume that because they're swinging through the city, that there's some light source coming from the ground beneath them, whether it be from street lamps or car headlights or just the reflection of sky in general. But the main light source is coming from behind them. So there is a lot of darkness that's kind of enveloped in the shadows, sitting almost like right in front of you, in the middle of the face, in the middle of the arm, and so on and so forth. Now you can see that shadow that I put in right on Spider-Man's forehead, talking or kind of referring to what I just mentioned. But again, lighting is going around the edges there, up at the top of the head, and we get that sense of three-dimensionality. Now make no mistake, remember we talked about line helping cheat that illusion of form. It's helping here quite a bit, but the lighting really kind of sells the whole thing and brings it home. Now we're about done this piece. We're just doing some touch-up work at this point, and that means emphasizing the sunlight, getting our webbing in, and creating a little bit of blur in the background to help cheat some depth. And that's our final piece. All right, I hope you liked it. Remember, if you haven't had a chance, go ahead and click on that subscribe button, and I'll have some new content posted soon. If you have some suggestions of some caricatures you'd like to see, feel free to leave a comment. I'm looking for some ideas, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for stopping by.